welcome. I'm Shalene from Cornerstone, here with Rachael Carrott from Adopt South and Vicky Pike from Adoption East Midlands to explore the cultural shift in practice seen using our VR programme.
In Adoption East Midlands, we've been lucky because we've engaged in a training, which is a research project around the global majority and thinking about culture. And we've taken the learning we've got from that into what we're doing. So some of our colleagues raised an issue about, a very valid point about how can you talk about a child's experience through their eyes, their cultural experience, if you're a white British social worker. And that's a really valid point, because I think part of the problem when we're thinking about culture is that we do that through a white British lens, and that's why we aren't always very successful in doing that. So some of the things that we've done to try and develop our thinking in that way is to bring in people that we know have had their own experiences through being a Black adoptee, for example, who have been brought up in white families. They've talked to us about their experiences, and they're helping us to think about what does it mean for potentially a Black child to be brought up in a white British family. How can we put ourselves in their shoes, and to really educate us around some of the challenges there are for children from our global majority. So thinking around their identity, if a child, like for example Rayleigh, we were talking about this the other day. Rayleigh is a Black child who is brought up by a white British mother and a white stepdad. So her actual cultural experience from the very beginning is actually white British. Yet when we think about placing her for adoption, we're probably going to be looking for a family that match her cultural identity. So let's say potentially we place her with a Black family. They're going to be coming at family life from a different cultural standpoint, but Rayleigh's is predominantly white British, because the chances are in our area she's also been with a white British foster family. So then you've got a child who is has a cultural identity that's partially white British, partially Black Caribbean, whatever the ethnicity is, and they somehow don't neither fit into either category. And how does that feel as a person? Where do you identify? Do you identify with the Black community? Do you identify with the white community? And if you identify with both, how do you make that happen in your life? How does the family promote that for you, and what does that really look like? So it's some of that sort of thinking, really, around the complexity for children who have mixed cultural identities, really, and what that means for them, regardless, as to which type of placement we choose, which elements of their identity are reflected, and then what that means for us as professionals when we're thinking about the reality of their emotional experiences, because we know that racism happens within trauma situations, and that early experiences of racism take place in the context of poverty as well as abuse. So it's interesting, really, isn't it? I mean, if you think about the hair scenario for Rayleigh as well, Rayleigh has a white birth mother who is struggling to brush her, which I'm purely presuming could be Black, Afro-Caribbean hair, which is tricky. They struggle to brush it, so they decide to cut it off. What does that say for Rayleigh about her hair and her identity of herself? And actually, she says, I feel disgusting, because that's what people told her she was. She's filthy, she's disgusting, you stink. So it's really relevant, actually. It's really enhanced our thinking around a child's experience in terms of their identity, and we're building on that. We're really early days with it. I'm early days in my understanding of that, and I'm really hopeful that we can continue to develop that further. So we're thinking like maybe for cultural cases that are very culturally diverse, that we will bring in sort of an advocate to comment on that, to help us be in the child's shoes. That might be somebody who's got their own experiences of that, so they can help us think about that based on the experiences they've had. So we're really looking to bring in people who have got that lived experience that they can then share and give us things to think about for our children.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's really just kind of, like you said, in terms of the different layers of
Mm,
practice, but really bringing a significant conversation to the table and giving
yeah,
that real kind of tangible, by having Rayleigh as your kind of standpoint, to really unpick that conversation and to think about that a bit differently in kind of every area of practice. Because like you say, there more than likely is that assumption to place Rayleigh in the Black family, but
mm,
actually her cultural experiences will look very different. And
yeah,
so how that makes her feel will have a real impact on her as well. And so, it's just amazing to see how the VR can really bring that felt experience as well, because I guess that's the connection that sometimes is missing from the conversation. Because, like you said earlier, around kind of, if you've not had that experience, then how do you fully understand that? And I guess alongside the advocates, you are Rayleigh, you are in Rayleigh's position, and the VR and that full immersion is around that felt experience as well and giving you that connection. And so I guess those conversations now are happening, starting to happen more widely within your organization, but also in terms of being much deeper, rather than maybe on the surface and maybe thinking, okay, we've done this and that's great for Alien, that's enough. But actually you're taking it those kind of steps further in terms of, well, actually it's not enough, and this is maybe what we need to be looking at, and this is how we can kind of implement it, and using the VR as part of that process and the resources that you've built around it as well, which sounds
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Rayleigh's case study and the VR helps is a tool to help us go beyond the discussions that have always traditionally been in place about, oh yes, well the adopters will make sure they know about hair care, or
Yeah,
the adopters will eat this type of food, or they'll go to this festival. And in the past, that's been like a tick boxing exercise where it's like, oh yes, tick tick tick.
yeah,
Whereas we know that actually to really meet a child's identity needs, it needs to go much deeper than that, and needs to be in the day-to-day living and relationships of everybody's lives. And I think it's that relational thinking that's key, and
yeah,
that's where the VR excels, isn't it, as a tool, because it drills down into that relational stuff, which is fundamental to attachment and bonding. And that's what it is, and that's what we should all be thinking about beyond our tick boxing and
yeah.
trying to meet certain criteria. And that's ultimately the value of it all.
Yeah, that's fantastic.